All right, welcome everybody. Good morning. Good morning. My name's Himal. I'm from Mana, and we have the incomparable Maggie Dent here today to help us through a really interesting, diverse, um, and probably challenging topic for a number of us. We were just talking earlier about Maggie's is going to attempt in the next hour plus to condense two of her books into 1 hour. So let's just start there as part of the context that we're all walking into today. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Today is about beliefs, the beliefs behind our behavior, and really asking us to examine gender in the ECE context. But before we dive in, I do want to start with an acknowledgement of country, and we want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we work and live, honouring elders past, present, and emerging. We respect the deep connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build a shared future together. I also want to acknowledge we have a number of different cultures joining us from across the world, including our Maori whānau from New Zealand and so on. So I also want to pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which you're all joining from today. And before we get started, just a little bit about us. We're Mana, and we're committed that every child has an extraordinary start to life. And it's part of our mission to share the good word of great people, including Maggie, who we have here with us today. Now, before we kick off, you'll see, and I can see a lot of people have already started engaging. We have a chat open. Please feel free to throw any questions as you go into the chat. Our team will be monitoring those questions and potentially turning those into Q&As. You can also vote on Q&As that you find particularly relevant to yourself, and we'll really look to address as many of these as we can, but definitely the most popular questions that come up. So as I said, we have Maggie Dent with us today. She goes without introduction, so I'm not going to introduce her. But we also have myself here, and that slide says Hayden. My name is not Hayden. My name's Himal. And hopefully, and I've tried to make the introduction as quick as possible because it's the second of our three-part series. But Maggie, I just want to kick off with, I was reading up about your view on gender, and you always kind of start the whole gender discussion with a bit of a disclaimer. So maybe let's start there. What's the disclaimer that we want to start with? And,
Oh, it's so important because we do know that, when we're talking about girls and boys, there is a statistically significant correlation of around 70%. But that doesn't mean all. But I'm going to read that because it's a really important thing, is that we know gender is fixed. It's not just a girl box and a boy box. And we know that sometimes, as a little girl, I was very much the tom girl. So I was no confusion about my gender, but I just preferred the boy play and the boy and all that. So you have us girls in the boy box sometimes, and you have girls in the boy box, the ones who can chat about their feelings, all that. So on top of that, we have not only, gender is not a social construct. There are biological drives that are within us that influence our behavior and our choices, but there's neurological ones, and then there's hormonal ones, because estrogen is very different to testosterone, as anyone who works with boys will know. So when I use the word boys, I'm referring to a significant number. When I talk about girls, it's a significant number, but we want people to take what helps them understand the children that they care for. But when I'm working, in the Mothering Our Boys space, what I want is that the outcomes I want to improve for our boys should not diminish what's happening for our girls. So in other words, it's not a better than or worse than. What we want is all our children to shine. And rather than better and worse, I'd love us to say they just significantly have some differences, that when we understand them, we change the lens with which we see them. So there it is.
Beautiful. I think also, I think probably over the last 10 years, I'm guilty of this, of like moving towards trying to find a mono lens in which to see all children. But actually,
that's what school systems say. It's a one size fits all. They're all ready to start 4 to 5, when we know, and as I'll explain in a moment, that may work for most of the girls, but there are many boys developmentally not in the same readiness as girls.
Yeah, gotcha. So tell me, maybe we can start with boys.
Yeah.
And you talk about how boys are really struggling in school and in early childhood environments, and there's probably fragility that we're not acknowledging when it comes to
Yeah.
boys. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and the trends are pretty significant. The number of our boys, 4 to 6-year-old, being suspended or expelled from places. We know that, there are around 80% of our
I think we may have lost Maggie. Just give her one moment to reconnect. Sorry, everyone. It looks like I think we've lost Maggie, and so we're just going to give her a moment to reconnect, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay. Hey, Maggie, welcome back.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We lost you right in the you had
Yes.
just started talking about the difference between
Yeah. So sorry about. Don't you love tech? Okay. What I
We're
wanted
back.
to start with is that perception that we keep thinking all girls and boys are the same. So, and also there are so many of our social norms that have been fed into us over, let's say years. And sometimes our fairy tales feed into it as well. And our nursery rhymes, girls are made of sugar and spice and boys, snails and puppy dogs' tails. So I'm going to challenge some of those today with great love. So the bit I wanted to start with is we actually know that our boys are more fragile in many ways than our girls, which is the opposite to what most of those gender norms are. So I'm going to go through it. Are you ready for this? So the very
Yes.
first one we know is that baby boys die pre-birth, at birth, and in the first 12 months of life at higher rates than girls. Secondly, and it's Dr. Alan Shaw's work, and it's probably going back now about 8 or 9 years. So it's been around for a while, but not in education. So in the first 12 weeks of gestation, if a little fetus is going to become a boy, it gets flooded in testosterone. And apparently nobody understands why, but it actually slows down the cognitive development of the baby's brain. So that at birth, our boys are cognitively behind our girls, right? And that flows in to when they're in early childhood, starting big school, starting high school, and anyone who's got sons trying to get them switched into life after that. They are behind. Now, there were some arguments early that the girl's brain, left and right, develop at the same time. And maybe with boys, it's more the right brain, the doing brain, but not the logical, linguistic one. It makes sense, but apparently there's not enough evidence for us to claim that. But anyone who's got a boy who doesn't have many words. The next one too, and it's a significant one from Steve Biddulph, is that girls are born with fine motor control, and then by 8 get core strength in their body. Boys start with core strength and eventually end up with fine motor control. And so guess what? What are we trying to get them to do sometimes in early childhood?
Writing,
Colouring in within the lines. So if they're unable to do that, and it's, well, of course they're not going to feel so good about themselves, right? And it's just these sorts of things that start chewing away at their self-worth, and I want you to bring that up a bit later. The next one is that when they are born, oh no, there's another one. a professor in the Kids Institute in Perth was testing the cord blood on baby boys and, correlating with all sorts of things to see if there was a link between, the levels of testosterone at birth. And he found a significant correlation, not a causation, but a correlation between high levels of testosterone in the cord blood and a difficulty learning to read. This is one of those areas, if you've got, had a boy, not only are they not as interested in the readers that come out that are boring because they haven't got activity or characters they like in it, there are some challenges that we need to factor in that we need to keep in the back of our mind. It's not necessarily, it could be a developmental thing or it's influenced by gender. The next one is that our boys, so when you pick a baby boy or a baby girl out of a cot from 3 to 8 months of age, what girls tend to do is lock onto faces. Now, how do we bring secure attachment? How do we feel safe as humans, particularly babies? Yep. Well, what do boys do? They look at the mobile, the light fitting, the spider web. So what happens is those behaviours mean they often find it harder to connect those attachment figures. And they're much more susceptible to the distress of not feeling safe. So one of my challenges in early childhood is when we transition little boys in, it is really advantageous if we try and attach them to one educator, one main educator, because the girl can probably adapt to more of them quite more easily. But a boy may find it harder and get incredibly distressed. Now, when they're incredibly distressed, often their behaviour goes into flight fight, which is throwing things, screaming, running away. And so often people view that as bad behaviour, and I want them to view it as high levels of distress, that we need to work on the connection and the sense of safety. And there's a really quick story I want to throw in here because there was a beautiful little boy in a setting. He was 4.5. All of a sudden, he's gone from a pretty kind of cool and cruisy kid that never did things that weren't okay to putting kids in headlock and throwing toys and getting really angry. Anyway, they came to me. I was counselling at the time, and I said, something's changed in his world. What's changed? And at first, Mum said, oh, my mum's been sick in hospital. And I said, well, he could worry about that. Has she come home? And she said, yeah, but does he know? So he can worry about something with someone he loves but not be able to articulate it. But I said, no, I think it's bigger than that. And then all of a sudden she remembered his favourite educator had gone on mat leave. So he was grieving someone really special, and it's coming out in a very different way in his behaviour. So we need to keep that in mind. What's under those behaviours? It's never a boy going, let me be naughty today. Okay, there's 2 more things in that. Our boys are much more susceptible to endocrine disruptors in food, and we know that poor food can drive boys' behaviour. Even men are more prone to upset tummies than women because we have to be tougher, we breed. So it also means they're more likely to struggle with stress. So those environments that are, once again, relationally safe, which is, of course, the whole overarching theme, isn't it, of the EYLF is belonging. The more that they feel they belong, the more they're safe. So that's also when a little boy starts, if he has a special friend. So when parents are choosing a school, they often go for the academic part, and I'm going, does he have a friend? Does he have a sibling who's gone there? Because they are way more fragile, and that plays out in so many ways that we misinterpret is a badly behaving boy.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is, and if I can try and unpack some of this, firstly, behind all the behaviors, we often as educators look for, like, what is the context driving that? But some of the things that we might miss is this, like, biological imperative or this biological difference that if we don't acknowledge might not give us the full picture, right? Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, it's so interesting. Can you, this idea of, for example, the core strength of boys developing earlier and the fine motor motor developing later. Can you tell me about, like, how that might, how you might see that maybe impacting that child's view of self and how that kind of propagates through life if we don't acknowledge that difference? All
right. Then when we flow the testosterone over the top, so the biological drive is that our boys were, in traditional cultures, they grow up to be men that save, protect, defend, they're not very good at organizing or writing things down, right? So essentially you'll have those highly energetic boys, sometimes running around looking like they're trying to kill things with their fingers out because you don't have guns in early childhood. And we can think, oh, no, we need to stop that behavior. But there's an archetype in there if you listen to boys. So often they're trying to say, want to kill the baddies and save the goodies. Okay, so my message again in that space is, if that behavior with a group of boys is frightening other children, we put a boundary around where they can do it. We don't ban it. And then secondly, if you have a girl who wants to get there, we give her a cape. Okay, so we don't shut down something that's driven by something at a very unconscious level. But the other thing in that factor too, you know, we often have the perception boys are tough. The man box is still influencing all of us. I think boys are tough. They've done research that shows we often speak more harshly to little boys than little girls. And I've heard this not only in playgrounds, in some of the early childhood settings, that if a boy falls over, okay, come mate, up you get, you're fine. But if a girl falls over, we swoop in with this sense that she's going to be wounded and you need my help and, oh, sweetheart. Well, both of those are inappropriate because they're sending messages to a child that, depending on your gender, is the difference of my response. I'm going to say, are you okay? Do you need a grown-up's help? And let the child direct our response. So again, it's you know, so often it's so deeply embedded in us that we may not notice we even do it. And I love it when I've had some of the centers do reflective practice on a couple of my short videos around these things, going, gosh, you know, I'm going to have to need to look at that. It's a bit like the one where a child runs into your center. If it's a girl, we're more likely to comment on how pretty she looks, on her appearance, which leads a girl to believe her appearance is the most important thing about her. So I had to work really hard on that because I've got beautiful granddaughters, and the one I land on, which is not going to celebrate her appearance, is, I think you've got taller since I saw you. Have you got taller? Even if she hasn't got taller, right? Because of this whole compare despair stuff of girls, that is in early childhood. We have fat shaming from some girls in early childhood, and they've learnt it off the behavior of the women in their life or what they see around them. So the role of early childhood is so huge at building the belief systems and the perceptions of how children see themselves. And then the last big one on this one is the self-worth of boys is much more likely to be something that the boy gives himself. Whereas girls, it's often, do other girls like it, or have you liked it? So therefore I must be okay. So a really simple example I use in mothering our boys is, you know, if a boy's decided he wants to build that Duplo tower to here, and he wants that veranda at the front, and if all of a sudden mum decides it's time to go to bed and she wants a tidy toy room, she makes him pack it up, and it's just ripped him off because he wasn't able to build it to that level. So I offered this one, and I'm sure early childhood educators know this, is that I say to them, if you haven't finished building it, you can come back to it later after we've had story time, or when we come home from school. And I have had mums reach out and say, that was such a game changer, because for my son, he said it may be the best day in his life, because for once he's going to be able to finish something. So he says, I've done good. But sometimes the things that they do that with are really stupid, like dragging their body around or trying to dig to China, or all these things that women say that's a stupid thing to do. But sometimes a little boy needs to work out that that's not something that's capable, rather than us telling them.
And maybe we can double click on that, Maggie. I know this is going a bit off track, but you know, earlier we were talking about the composition of educators in early childhood education, and you know, the majority of educators, 96 to 98%, are female, right? And yeah, what influence do you think that has on how education occurs for both boys and girls?
I think it's huge. And so the early childhood educators who had brothers are way better at navigating boys in their centres than the ones who only had sisters, right? Because there's all sorts of things that they've had normalised, like the energetic needing to jump and throw things and not listening. And we'll go through a couple of those, won't we, in a moment, why they're so different. They have a sort of inbuilt understanding. And so, and that's the reason I wrote Mothering Our Boys, because I kept running into women saying, oh, who is this crazy thing in my house? You know, he doesn't listen. He doesn't know where anything is. He can't stop moving. And I had to kind of go, hang on a minute. Where did you think these things were, you know, wrong? And that was really why I had to write Mothering Our Boys after having raised 4 of them. But I also was very lucky that I had a lamb for a younger brother. So that meant I grew up with a sensitive boy, right, who wasn't into chest banging and claiming how, because that's what the patriarchy celebrate. And every now and then, you know, we worry that we don't want our boys to wear a dress at dress-ups because that will feminize them, or we think we have to toughen up the sensitive boy. And what we now know is in their own time, in their own way, they often claim their own power, but it's not one that chest bangs, but it's quietly, yeah, I'm okay now. And so I think sometimes we accidentally think I need to push him forward a bit more. But if you push a sensitive boy forward, the same as you push a sensitive girl, it will just increase their anxiety pathways, and they'll take even longer to claim that sense of power. Mm-hmm. And I feel that's a conversation we also need to have in our centres.
And what would you say to educators in trying to maybe empathize, or not empathize, but maybe take the perspective of what it would, you know, what it is like to be a boy if they are a female educator and maybe don't have that kind of background or context? Like, what are some of the things that we've started to touch on a little bit of it today, but, you know, how?
All right. So some of them are really important for us to understand. And the first one is that the male brain is much more focused on single focus, not multiple focus, because that also comes from our biology. All I had to do was kill a mammoth or practice killing, and then or kill a deer for dinner, and basically everything else was in the girl domain: organization, planning, memory, looking after the elderly, the children. So keep that in the back of our mind, because you can get really frustrated with a little boy who is, maybe it's mat time and we have an expectation they can sit with their legs crossed and their hands crossed. Well, that's another thing that we didn't know. Girls' wrists and ankles are more flexible than boys, and crossing arms and feet can actually be quite painful for a boy, a young boy. And when they stretch out, we think they're being naughty. Sometimes when they're running out of dopamine because they're sitting, because physicality builds the engagement in the brain. That's what gives them the dopamine that means they can concentrate. So when a little boy starts stretching and pushing around in a circle, we can perceive that as bad behavior. I want us to see the lens that says, hang on a minute, I'm running out of dopamine. I quite like this story. I'd like to hear the end of it, so I just need to make a bit, right? So can we put the boys who have higher needs of physicality towards the back of the group that allows them movement that doesn't disrupt the other children, rather than punishing the child because we feel they should all be able to do it, which is where that mono kind of lens comes in again. And also sometimes our boys, and this is a really biggie, the ability to communicate and form words is very different to girls. We know that our girls, I mean, gosh, as soon as I had my granddaughters, not only had I never seen an hour-long tantrum, because often they have much bigger feelings that come out for much longer and everything, but they were super smart at helping me solve problems that I'd never witnessed. And so if we've always known girls are clever enough to solve their own problems, we can perceive that boys can do the same. Also, their capacity to listen. And I mean, I learned this in a high school classroom. You know, if I used too many words or gave too many instructions for the next assessment, I lost every boy in the room. And I started to think, wow, they don't seem to be able to take as many words. So if you're giving out instructions in a setting, one at a time rather than 1, 2, 3, because I'll only hear the first. If you give them 2 more, then they'll tend to forget the first one as well. So it's about us just adapting it a little bit and not making the assumption that they're deliberately not listening to me.
Gotcha.
They are deliberately, and that's a really big one. If you actually want boys' attention, sometimes calling out to them is about the single focus. If they are absorbed with that piece of equipment, that play in the sandpit, they will not hear your voice. And that is not deliberate. That is the absorption of the single focus. So if you want their attention, you might come over and ruffle their head. You might stand near them and just get down to their level and call their name until they look up to you. And then you can give them, maybe instead of, I need you to go and wash your hands because it's lunchtime and I want you inside. That's 3. Just go wash your hands. Yep, thumbs up. It's over there. Also point. Because we know when we go, you've got to go and wash your hands. Make sure you use the soap and don't forget to dry your hands. No, you've wiped all of that out. And I think it's those moments that when we recognize that verbal stuff, then we go to their memory. And the difference there is like eons,
Right.
You can talk to mums and say, go and get your shoes out of your bedroom. They don't come back. Why do they not come back? Well, they forgot what you wanted, can't remember where their shoes are, and they saw the Lego truck. None of that's a bad behavior. That's a distraction of single focus, and they're immature. They gradually get better at it. Whereas your girls know where everything is in the entire house. Not only that, if you've got a beautiful, tidy playroom, they know where every toy is in every box. But if a boy walks in, you'll go, there's nothing to play with in here. Can't even remember which one's the Lego box. Educators can intuitively know this, which is why they have some things out that help our boys go and get engaged with some things early. And I feel that one there, when we're trying to teach them things that are important, whether it's about health or well-being, they need sometimes good visual reminders, because the words just can be too much, too many words, can't understand. It's more they can't comprehend lots and lots of words. And that was kind of, when I've got my granddaughters, and how's this for a really simple example of how smart they are?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm at a morning tea. My oldest little granddaughter was 3 at the time. The baby was 1. We're there. I came in one car with Poppy. My son came in another car, and Mum came in another car, and a grandmother figure came in. So all of us had a car. And my granddaughter at the time is 3 years of age, says to me, Nanny, can I come shopping with you? Because I said I had to do some grocery shopping. And I said, sweetheart, you can't come because I haven't got any car seats in our hire car. And she just paused, and not a minute later, she's got a hand on me, says, I've got a great idea. How about you drive Daddy's car and Daddy drives your car, and then I'll come shopping with you? She's 3.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And then I had to kind of encourage my son, because he's just, a single focus male. Use her memory to your advantage. Like if you've got to get some things when you go to grocery shopping, tell her what those things are, and I guarantee she'll remind you in the shop. And he talked to me and said, yeah, she can. But do you know what she's doing now? She's opening the fridge. By now she's 4.5, opening the fridge and going, no, we've run out of apples. We also need some yogurt, and there's not much cheese left. Now, I'm going to suggest that 70% of boys isn't able to do that.
I don't think I'm still able to do that. I hope I'm not that dumb.
Yeah, no. But that might assume, okay, and so some of those other messages, boys will be boys. So when they haven't got the words, if they run up to a girl and hit a girl, we go, oh, that's because she likes it. No, that's not acceptable. That means that little boy hasn't got the verbal capacity or the understanding on what he wants to express to that girl. So don't punish him with sitting down and say, if you like that girl, you run up and you say something, or you might run up and you don't hit. Remember, hitting's what often boys do. We're going to touch on that in a moment, aren't we? Physicality and what it is really all about. And that means that lens is, again, that their behavior that's challenging is not necessarily inevitable with warm coaching, which is what so many of your beautiful educators are doing, because you already know that. I've just got to give him some words when that happens, or I've got to let him know that, we use soft hands around here, and that sometimes it's hard to stop that. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that, often, and this is an interesting piece around our own gender biases, our expectations of behavior, our expectations of our morality around good and bad behavior, all of those things.
Cultural influences,
all of those coming into play and influencing how we view specific behaviors. If I take my foster son for example, we're constantly reminding soft hands, we have play hands, and, et cetera, and creating that language. But for him, that's normal, natural. That's not
Yeah,
like
it's
for him,
coach.
it's right. And so maybe we can go into Maggie, and maybe this is the opportunity because we've been alluding to this for a while, starting to kind of provide more clarity for our incredible group here around what are some of, let's like deep dive into the biological, the cognitive, the developmental, the hormonal, all of these differences, so that we can start to maybe paint a picture for ourselves around what is normal behavior for a boy. And I'm using, air quotes here, right? But, because we've got to normalize this in order to understand that it's not inherent to that child. It's just how they've been created, right?
Yeah, well, I think the first place we start with is the effect of estrogen versus testosterone. So estrogen is a bonding neurochemical, which is why the friendship dramas of girls, and when they're working, they're beautiful, and when they're not, they're not. But also why many of our boys struggle in that domain, because they don't have enough of the estrogen to be able to work out, and also they lack the words. So they don't run up to a boy and say, gee, I really love your jacket. Now, do you barrack for the Bombers, or can you come and play with me? And they just go up and might give him a punch on the arm. Okay, so that aggression nurturance is actually a form of sometimes emotional bidding for connection, which really doesn't look like that sometimes. Like
it's like attention seeking.
It is. Yeah. And so often when they like a boy, they'll want to wrestle. As I said, if anyone's got a house full of boys, they'll know how much wrestling goes on. It's not a sign your boys don't like each other. In actual fact, it may be a sign they do like each other. And every now and then we'll come out with a line, I don't think you meant to hurt. Right? Because they're not good at navigating those things. Whereas the very thought for a girl to leap on another girl for fun isn't probably there, but she's already working out behind her scenes, behind her brain, okay, well, that worked, or I could do that, or maybe we could play this game together. And it's so one of the things we notice is the way that our kids play is very different. And there's a couple of studies that I share in girlhood that just were mind-blowing when I realized them. The first one was they did MRIs on boys and girls when they told them they were going to possibly have a new friendship, a new friend coming. So what happens in the girls' brains when it's a possibility of a new friendship? The whole brain lights up like a Christmas tree with excitement. What happened in the boys' brains? Nothing, or distress.
Wow.
That's the impact of estrogen, right? So this is why sometimes our little boys can struggle with creating friendships. I've written a blog called Fragile Boy Friendships that ended up going quite global, because we need to understand it's different. And sometimes educators will need to facilitate the proximity. So therefore a boy is playing beside other boys, doing a similar thing, often makes that sense of I've got a friend and his face. So we need to sometimes teach them welcoming strategies, or, engagement strategies and farewell strategies, because it doesn't automatically come to many boys. But when we teach them, there's nothing that will change a boy's interaction in their environment. When a boy runs up with a smiley face, you will have a different boy in terms of his behavior for the whole day.
Wow.
Right? But sometimes if we haven't taught them that, it can be really challenging. So that's a really, really important one. The second one around that was fascinating in this thing was they had 4-year-old girls, 3 4-year-old girls, 3 4-year-old boys. They set up a castle. And they sent the boys in. They looked at the castle, and it wasn't very interesting. So they just took off and played chasey, and no one says a word. They just randomly do stuff, which is really common. And then they sent the girls in, and they sat there. And after 6 minutes, they're working out the rules. 12 minutes, still working out the rules. And at 18 minutes, they started to play with the castle. So they need to have boundaries and rules around it. That is way more complex than what most boys. And then the next thing they did, which was really enlightening, there was a big stuffed toy. So when the boys ran in, they threw it around for a bit, and then that bored them. So they went off running again, randomly, chasing each other, having a hoot of a time. The girls moved in, and one of the girls picked up the stuffed toy. And within 20 seconds, the other 2 girls have turned their back on that girl and have started to play a new game. So they've decided to exclude her. Now, can you see again, when we look at it through that lens, we've got to understand there's so much more nuance going underneath in those, in those 70% little camps, and that it's driven by all sorts of things, but it's a combination of what we've always done, because girls have needed other girls to support them in times of crises, and they've got to work out ways they can get into that. And sometimes the friendship dramas, how we handle those, we've got to be really careful that there's always been, nastiness that's random. But when we know it's planned and it's predicted and it's intending to cause harm and it's repeated, then yes, we have to have a job to step in. But sometimes you can't sit down and give a big lecture to some girls who've just done a random moment of unkindness. Yeah. Okay. So there's something else on top of all those, and that is that the ability for our boys to learn new information is related to that self-worth that says, what's in this for me? So the doing part is what I love early childhood, because that's what you do all the time. And whether it's just water play or building sandcastles or whatever, boys, there's this doing capacity. They actually have a high need of moving that body in a meaningful way. So sometimes the activities like doing a painting, they can look at that thinking, no, not really. And you have to laugh, because one of my boys, I didn't have any paintings on my fridge because they went to a lovely community kindergarten that was very much embracing, children-led play and lots of nature time. And they'd go in occasionally for a story, but they never did a painting. And then one day my 4-year-olds come home with a painting, and I thought, wow. He said, yeah, no, we were at someone's house the other day and they have lots of paintings on their fridge and you don't have any, so I've done one for you. So isn't that lovely that he's actually...
So they saw what's in it for them, mum being happy, and that drove that.
You can see again, if their self-worth is linked to the sense of what they give themselves, and you want them to do paintings and they go, that's it, done, got that out the road because that's what she wanted. What is it that may be engaging for a boy? Might be definitely the water play or the rubbish truck going by, or, so there's a randomness within that I think is that interpreting, the warrior, the side of them that may need to be brave. I don't know, but it's a biggie. But can I touch on one other thing before we go?
Go for it. There's
often an incredible sensitivity to boys around favorites. And that can also be, favorite T-shirt, a favorite book. It can be the rock under the bed. It can be, something random that they've had, that they've kept. And we often miscalculate that. And, even in some settings, I've spoken to some educators who've told me that there's one particular stuffed toy that a little boy has loved for his whole 4 years. And when he went to leave, that was what distressed him more than leaving the educators or the centre. And we have to be careful not to assume they can just adapt to those things. It's a really, really important one. And the second one I want to touch on is the sensitivity of little boys and their tummies, and especially around poo. Because what happens for many little boys is poo is a bit of a performance. It's not just, having a poo. I mean, my grandson at the moment keeps getting me to go and look at his, whether it's a dinosaur one or a lion's one. That doesn't tend to happen for girls. And so that sensitivity, and they're also sensitive to pain. So, and also they need to sit for a bit. And that's really hard for a lot of boys, to sit long enough for a poo to eventually eventuate. And so often, unless your environment is really super safe, or you've got something else that's keeping them a little bit interested while they're waiting for the poo, they'll hold on till they go home. And so a lot of little boys will be in a hurry to get home because they've got to drop off a poo. It's a really important thing for us to keep in mind, that that's why they're often later to toilet train in that area, and that they're not deliberately, but the more pressure we put on them, the longer it will take to nail that. So it's a really important thing about how susceptible they are to pressure and stress. And then the last one I want to touch on is that whole notion that a boy's penis is an external form of genitalia that is actually like a form of best friend. And sometimes that fascination with it, even though we're in a world where we really need to be keeping mindful of what's healthy and what's not unhealthy in that space, sometimes they want to hold it because it helps calm them down. And that's not a highly sexual act. It's actually, oh my gosh. And none of us as females know what that's like. We've just got to get used to dropping the towel or the blanket over it while they're little, because that is the thing that's going to calm them down while they're not near us safe growing up. That we don't see it automatically as a sexual act, and that we also talk about there's a quiet space if you need to be calm. And I think because not one of us females knows what it's like.
Yeah, it's
a warm hand on the scrotum is calming.
Who knew, Maggie? Who knew? Okay, I'm just thinking about time here, and I think we've covered a lot. I just probably want to. How about we unpack emotional intensity and unpredictable behaviors? Because I think that's I mean, maybe I'll just give you the floor to unpack that.
Yeah, no, okay. So this is one of the things I noticed immediately was the emotional intensity, but with our girls, and that is linked to all sorts of things, but mainly estrogen, but also their perception of how the world is. You know, they create perceptions that they react to. And so ruminating loops and negative thoughts are much more likely in little girls than they are in boys as well. So they can get stuck in a loop that nobody likes me and everyone hates me, and that's going to feed more and more. That means, so one of the things we actually know is that the intensity is significantly different. However, the thing that does our heads in as parents and educators is the unpredictability. And that is that they can change their mind about how they react to something. So sometimes you will have a little girl absolutely losing it because a girl has turned up at her birthday party with the same shoes, and she's so upset about it, you know, and yet, you know, you can go to another party where the birthday girl is celebrating a girl's turned up in the same shoes. So that is the challenge. I think we have to understand with little girls as they develop in their emotional maturity is it's never the same response. Now, the ability to be jealous of other girls definitely is impacted more with the temperament and also that predisposition to coping, which is kind of like rooster girls want to be the center of attention. They want to be noticed. They want to be the most perfect, important girl in the room. And yes, they can need to have some coaching around being not too dominant and to develop empathy and understanding. We really need that, but you'll know those girls in your center. Sometimes they'll be telling you.
Did you call them the rooster girls?
Yeah, so roosters and lambs, and the rooster girls, but they can also be the orchid girl. So dandelions are fairly, no matter what girl or boy or wherever, they tend to be pretty cruisy. They deal with things and upsets quite well. The orchid, all their big feelings are really big, and they're especially big around jealousy, comparison, and embarrassment. And sometimes they hold it in and take it home to their parents, but sometimes it'll happen in your center. And it can be completely irrational. And they can hold on to it for days. And I know that was the challenging bit with me learning. And, you know, that was the feedback I got from all the people in the survey was we're just confused. We never know what reaction we're going to get. So the big thing for girls is they need to be heard after they've had that massive thing. Right? Obviously great if you can get a boy, but he's not always ready to talk after he's had a big meltdown. It might be 2 days later. But what we know is that if they're able to talk about it without you necessarily explaining or coaching, they have to be heard. Then it allows those big feelings to discharge from their nervous system. So when we just, you know, and I come from a generation where you were sent to your room because that was, you know, you had to sit in those big feelings, or we still have those big feelings. We know they store them, which means they're more volatile at other times. So there is actually brain research that shows that when a girl's amygdala fires up and they're in threat mode, the next thing that fires up is the word center. But in boys, when the amygdala fires up, the next center that fires up is the body. And a lot later, the word center. But if they use movement, they can often access the words. So they're two really big things when you're working with a big meltdown or a big emotional something. There are slightly different ways that we get the child to feel seen and heard. then
So for boys, it's about redirecting to movement, then communicate.
Yep.
You know,
Or else know you can
language.
pick it up the next day.
Yeah,
But
gotcha.
don't pick it up in that moment, because there's no way he has any idea why he did it, what you're talking about, or how to follow logic. Whereas a girl is probably ready right away.
So you can start having the conversation once the moment starts to dissipate.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. When she's
Wow.
just coming back to there, you'll go, oh, you know, how are you? What was that? And I'll go, yeah, she did this and I didn't. And I love it that I've been coaching dads to do a lot more listening of their daughters, because often the dad wanted to know, what do I have to fix? And I said, nothing.
Just listen.
Just stay really, just nod. You know, if she wants you to hold her, that's great, but just let her go until she's finished, because you'll know when she's finished discharging it. And this is what a lot of us women know as the vent. We just sigh. And that means all the energy tied up in that has left our body rather than stayed in there, which is going to help us later with a similar experience.
Yeah, wow. Awesome. Now, Maggie, we've got 15 minutes left, and I know you love questions. How about we let's do it. Okay, just going to pull them up now. All right. So everyone, actually, just before we get into this, one of the commitments that Maggie and I have for these sessions is that we really spend as much time as we can unpacking whatever questions that you have. Whatever questions you have. So please feel free to throw any questions into the chat. We'll start to identify those which can go into Q&A, and then we'll put those into Q&A. We have a number of them coming through. Thank you, everyone. So maybe we'll start with this one from Peter, which was, sorry, Peter, this was 24 minutes ago, Maggie. What about boys who don't have typical boy behaviors and don't meet the benchmarks of expected behaviors in kindergarten milestones? So I think she's asking more on how we might perceive, manage, and exercise our professional responsibility there.
Look, there's no question that what we do know is that when boys feel they have a safe growing up, particularly educators, we know that boys do better in classrooms where they think the teacher likes them. You just work on connection. It doesn't matter what the boy's turning up with, even if they've got, neurodivergent tendencies, they've got ADHD or they've got trauma and they're really challenging, they will land on a safe base. And when that safe person is one that can also use laughter and lightness, then laughter and lightness often helps them discharge, the things that girls use words to. But absolutely every single time, we've got to let them feel seen and heard as they are, not how they could be or how others think they could be. Relationship and safety. And really, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to develop that is through gentle actions of kindness.
Can you say more about that?
Unbelievably, just gentle, and they just suddenly come alive and feel so safe. So emotional safety.
Could you say more about the gentle actions of kindness? So, what are some examples of that?
Okay, so what tends to happen for boys, because they make so many poor impulsive decisions most of the time, and you're ever as a parent, and sometimes they, no, get down off there. No, you can't jump off there. Put that down. No, you can't swing that around. No, don't do wee over there. It's in you just, so what they're hearing is don't, no, not okay. And so inside them, there are all those messages that says there's something wrong with me. But when a person comes over and says, I can see that's really hard for you, could you like some help? Or how about you come in and get a drink of water? Do you want me to get you one? I can bring it out here. Tiny gestures of kindness, turn that off and make them feel worthwhile, make them feel they matter, even though they keep making poor choices. So kindness is so powerful, especially teenage boys.
Okay, gotcha. Now, Adele has asked, is it wrong to line up children in lines of boys and girls?
Okay. Look, I'd probably say, can we just line up anyway? But it's almost like the same as, do we have to line up quietly? There's all these other things that we often put onto kids who are developmentally not necessarily as capable. Boys don't even know what a line is half the time because they just want to jostle each other. And I just think sometimes we need to, be as, whatever the standards are in your centre, just every now and then have a conversation about it. It's a bit like having two different dress-up boxes. At the end of the day, does it matter if the boys are wanting to wear a dress for a change? They're the conversations within your centre. But has any child been harmed, or are we nagging the hell out of them because they don't want to stand? And to be really honest, you got a line. The boy line is going to be a lot more all over the place probably than the girl line. So maybe if we mix them up, we could see how that worked. Does that work for us? Good luck.
And it goes back to that comment you made earlier around kind of how when we enforce particular standards of behaviors in a uniform way across, and it creates this it creates that perception of self for either the boy or the girl. Like if we expect girls to be emotionally, emotionally monotone, and then they have big feelings and that's an expectation, then it creates that story that something's wrong with me or so on, and that propagates later into life. And
often girls are asked to sit with a boy that's, struggling because she might calm him down. Well, that's not her responsibility either. And again, welcome to the challenges of education at any age.
Yeah, wow. So we don't have a view on that yet, but there's something definitely to think about there. So we have a question from Catherine saying, with boys' behaviors, what's the best way of handling pinching, hitting, and biting when a child wants a toy that another child is playing with, other than redirecting? How do we change this behavior?
All right. So in that moment, what we know, especially the biting, come on, we know biting is something a lot of our toddlers do, and it's not a choice of bad behavior. My challenge around that is you look like you need to do some more biting. How about we go get a carrot or an apple? So I redirect it to something else rather than always saying soft hands and we don't bite, great. But while the child's in that state, I would make sure we have an educator close by or a parent close by who swoops in at that moment, because we just need to break the habit. It's there's something going on and there's a lot of reasons why they do any of those things, but we need to be nearby so that we can redirect them to a different choice. So one of the things we didn't touch on was when boys muck up, I often go through these steps because I need them to know most of the time it was not intentional. The 3 rules I argue that we need to teach boys is try not to hurt yourself or anyone else or the world around you, because any more rules than that, they won't remember. The first thing is, what were you trying to do? So were you trying to get that toy? I know. And it's hard to wait, isn't it? It's really hard to wait. Maybe we could play with this toy until that toy is ready. I know it's hard, but we're learning how to wait. Yeah, but I can see it, once again, that's a simple one. But underneath that, when they've made that poor choice, we need them to know that it's not okay. And then we need to know how to make it right. And so when they're really little, we know that they don't understand remorse and, sorry until well over 5. But we need to basically use those words for them rather than expect them to. I'm sure you're sorry, you didn't mean to hurt. But what are you going to do next time you want a toy? So we just practice 2 or 3 different things. I'm a huge fan of Ross Green's. Basically, kids do well when they can. And sometimes developmentally, a 2-year-old does not have the brain capacity to make great decisions, girl or boy. But as they get a little bit older, it's that coaching that I talked about before. If we come alongside a boy and coach him and you are safe growing up in his world, he's more likely to listen to you, but he will need many reminders because he won't remember as well as a girl. And it's our job as to how many times do I need to do that? And then we need to, once again, accelerate at the end and recognize high five. We can do that, can't we? High five, dude. So we do a physical connection that's positive, and then know that you're going to have to replay that and replay that and replay that, and then he will probably get it.
It's so interesting, actually, having that concept of age and developmentally relevant expectations of behavior as well. Like the idea of, let's say, a child who's 1.5, 2 years old, asking them not to bite or say sorry, all those kind of things, just not going to happen. But can we start to essentially just see it as a habit and retune that habit?
Yeah. So anytime we unhabit a bad habit, by slowly, and yes, redirection's a great tool, but it's not a teaching tool. So we still want a teachable moment in amongst it. But sometimes all that's going to work on that day is a redirection, because seriously, either you're exhausted or it's late in the afternoon and we've already done it 5 times and I'm over it. So, you know what I mean? So we're aiming for that with our, but I do absolutely recognize they do not have the cognitive capacity to go, right, so I want that toy. I'll just take it. Because they're in that stage of development where autonomy is me. That's why they get upset when the banana breaks and they get upset with the wrong color cup. It's irrational, but it's exactly developmentally healthy and normal to be experiencing the outside world through the lens of a 2 to 3 year old child.
It might be interesting as well to kind of what that would look like, because I know a lot of the context around questions like that, as well as parental reactions and responses to biting and so on, and how we set developmentally appropriate expectations with parents as well, that this can happen in an easy setting, in a social setting,
especially when they've been raised with behaviorism. Like the behaviorism says you got to punish that child because otherwise they're going to keep doing it. And what they actually don't realize is that all that punishment will do in that moment is probably push it down a bit, but in actual fact, it risks damaging the relationship. The child will not be able to learn from that to make a better choice. And, being able to explain that to parents who were growing up with the smack or the naughty corner or the whatever. Yeah, it's one of the biggest jobs we have today, as a parenting educator as well, that also overpraising and too many rewards. But there are times that some are we just do it. You know what I mean? But I think it's that lens that thinks you've got to stop them and make them know it's wrong. Well, yeah, but that doesn't teach. And that's why discipline versus punishment is a conversation I think educators, need to keep on having. We've got this and we're working on changing behavior as spontaneous behavior rather than punishing a child who makes a poor choice because they are a child who wants something that is currently in someone else's hands.
And it's about also, I loved how you said, part of it is us just being more present in those moments, if we're starting to see those behaviors, us planning for those behaviors.
Because and our whole team is going to keep an eye, they're in the sandpit. We know they threw a truck yesterday. And I think that is exactly what, experienced educators are brilliant at doing. They've done this a million times. And they kind of know that highly spirited child is going to struggle a little bit in the next couple of years at navigating how to share or how to be, a kind child. But you've already done it. And that we invest that energy. We don't shout, shame, punish, but we're going to keep on doing those steps because eventually it'll click.
Nice. Now, Kayla has asked, and we'll keep going. Kayla has asked, how can I support my team to change their mindset on getting children ready for school when we've just identified that boys, more so than girls, physically can't sit on a mat without the need to move?
Look, I love that question because thank you. But isn't that what's the whole challenge of early childhood is we've moved away from allowing our children to grow through, opportunities of play and interacting with other children to gradually get better at being with other children. We now know from the Australian Early Development Census that our kids are turning up with significant vulnerabilities, but emotionally and socially, they're the biggies. And sometimes that lack of frustration tolerance, the lack of being able to have a no, the lack of a boundary is making it even harder. And you're absolutely right. This is why we have to have these conversations that you can be a securely attached parent and still have firm boundaries and no. I think that's the number one message parents kind of need to keep having affirmed to them. It's not easy being a parent with a kid that's upset because they didn't get the bicky before dinner, but it is our job. Once again, the one around boys, I'll keep fighting that battle. I'm going to probably die on that hill. Because Steve Bidoff and I have been saying for a long time that probably a good idea to give boys another 12 months. So they've got the cognitive delay. They've got the fine motor skill delay. They're really sensitive to stress. They're really sensitive to, separation distress that on heightened levels. We've got the evidence for all those things, and yet we still put them in with the same expectation and wonder why you have big meltdowns in the car, why they're resisting having a go at that word book, and why, because it's all linked to how we are in a hurry to focus on grades, and we're not focusing on the whole child. And the whole child has a mind, a body, a heart, and a soul, as early childhood educators know. And you are nurturing all of those, because this developmental window is the most significant one that sets up the boundaries, not for just being ready for school. It's for who they become later. And that's why those beautiful, once again, the belonging, the being, and the becoming more. That's exactly what we're doing, guiding children to grow in all sorts of life skills and understandings that will help them in a classroom environment. And sometimes the ability to listen is one of them, which is one of the ones that boys can find a little bit tricky.
And Maggie, maybe if I can summarize a bit of that for Kayla as well, from what I took away from that is, we don't necessarily need to have the developmental expectation that a child can sit down at mat time to be ready for school, because that's not, our job isn't to get them ready for school. It's to participate in these early years of life and get them ready to be extraordinary human being out there. And I hope you align with that idea as well. But I think, would you be advising someone like, in Kayla's situation, where they've just said that they're trying to get them ready, trying to get boys ready for school by getting them to sit down? Is there maybe an opportunity to reframe that by participating in play, or using their bodies in a less disruptive way? Or how might you help Kayla's team?
Well, there's no question. I've been fighting for a long time that still in some of our classrooms, when a boy can't complete a task because he's developmentally unable to, when it is assumed that he is not trying, then we will probably punish him by keeping him in at recess, which means that he has no opportunity to discharge the cortisol and the stress from the opportunity of being failed and letting down his teacher. And therefore, we're going to have a higher escalated cortisol level, and they're going to go into after recess. So again, when they understand that so much of boys' physicality is trying to discharge the stress about getting things wrong, or they actually have a higher need for movement, which helps their nervous system resettle, rather than seeing it through the lens of, well, they just should be able to do what girls do. So I am going to say that it's an understanding. So sometimes if you've, like I said, every now and then I know that there's a teacher who's been presented with some of my printed blogs off my website that probably wish they hadn't been. But I've done a really major 8,000 word blog that talks about how we can help our little boys navigate this transition from the parent lens and the teacher lens, because if we're all on the same page, recognizing that, yes, we've got a boy who's going to squirm around in his seat because he needs more movement. If I'm unable to build more brain breaks into the classroom, then I need to work out how he can do more of that movement, so that he's not disrupting others, but he's able to create some more dopamine, so he's able to participate in the learning environment, because I can see he wants to, but there's just nothing in there to do it. You cannot learn when your brain is flooded with cortisol and you're stressed. And so the two ways, acting out and freezing, are really common. And also our girls do the same. We know that girls are fawning more in classrooms, the ones who are pretending they're fine when they're not fine. So I think we really all need to understand the neurobiology, understanding what stress does to our kids. Now, let's put our hands on to all the teachers out there who did not ask for the changes in education that forced down accountability, excess assessments, and also NAPLAN, which I call napalm. They didn't ask for any of those. So they know how things have changed and why our teachers are burning out as well. So every now and then, please come alongside your educator and say, what can we do together? Because our boys can change with gradual support, but they won't necessarily be able to change and adapt through just the punishment lens about what they're doing wrong all the time.
That's so powerful. Thanks for that, Maggie. Now, we have one more question, and we're a bit over time, so I just want to acknowledge that to everyone who's here. Thank you for hanging with us. I'm sure you're getting no value at all. I'm joking, of course. But Maggie, and I'm not across this program, so you may be across it, but Jessica has asked, we have an incredible program at our center that has come about due to the number of the amount of time children have spent engaged in physical play, called Big Play 100, named by boys, can you tell? It has allowed us to unpack the why, and this webinar showed up in my email. I couldn't go past it. We are going to use this so much of this information to support our practices. What are your thoughts about the timing of Big Play? Are you aware of Big Play?
No, I'm not, but I'm really glad to hear it. We do know, I work really closely with everyone in the play area because I'm such a massive play advocate, particularly risky play and energetic play. And I, it's beautiful because, it's really hard to be able to change, what has been kind of forced down that, all kids are the same and they all just have to get up there, which is exactly why I get concerned when we have expectations for our neurodivergent kids to just have to try harder to be able to manage the system that's been created for neurotypical kids. I absolutely love and support anything that's in that space. And I feel I just need to let you know that there are schools that have got much more engaging play activities now for our kids, particularly our boys, that encourage long-term negotiated play, whether it's building cubbies or bases. And they notice the shift in the boys' behaviour in the classroom, because they're also using the language and working out how to get on with other kids and how to plan. And so all of the things that play brings into the world will improve all of our girls' and our boys' ability to navigate the school system. There's no question. But there is one school that's super brave. And I mean, just recently I had kind of like that moment where I went, you've got to be kidding me, where there's a school in Sydney that's now banned. It's a boys' school. They've banned running and touching. And then I have to close my eyes and go, okay, but there is an amazing school, a government school in Western Australia, which is kind of one of the ones I chat about in the play episode on Parental as Anything. Honeywood Primary. It's a, kind of like it's a big area, fairly new suburb. And the teacher, who is very experienced, now the principal, chose to have really wide areas where they could ride bikes and scooters. And I've been to that school where the whole primary school is racing around on bikes and everything, outside, discharging excess energy, learning how to take care of each other, giant trampolines. And the kids are not being hurt. But what's happening is there is no school reluctance. There's no school can't, because play and that energy is building brains that are better to learn after recess and after lunch. So again, we're just going to have to keep fighting for the right for our children to be able to play as much as they can, which develops not just a physical body, it builds a beautiful brain, and it builds social and emotional skills that really help our kids adapt anywhere in life. And sometimes one of the biggest lessons we learn from play, isn't it, is learning to lose and learning don't always get what we want. Beautiful.
Oh, wow. Just being in play almost.
Yes.
Well,
thank you for that,
Maggie,
that honours play as much as it can. I love it. And I love it when I can see a centre that looks like it's a rubbish dump, because I know they're doing loose parts and much more creative child-centred play, even though it does look like it's a rubbish dump. Well done, all of you.
Wow. Awesome, Maggie. Well, thank you for your participation today, everybody. Thank you, Maggie Dent, for your wisdom. Just before we all go, I just want to throw a couple of things there for everyone. So in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, I think, we're hosting Maggie again for the last part of this 3-part series. So please join us for that. If you're interested in registering, the link to register should be there on your screen now. Please feel free to bring on whomever you'd like that you think can benefit from it. This is free. This is a gift that we want to give to the sector, and we're partnering with Maggie to do that. So please come across, please come and share the value that we're hoping to take to the sector. And then now, second last, Maggie has been so generous in sharing some of her gifts of the world to you today, but she's also been generous in providing you a discount on the Giving Young Girls and Boys the Best Start webinar as well. So thank you, Maggie, for that. And you can if you want to claim that discount, you can just press that button on your screen now as well to register. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Again, Maggie, thank you for your time as well. This webinar is recorded, and if anyone or if any of your team missed it today, you can please feel free to share that recording with them as well. But until next time, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.
See you. Bye.